Welcome, Legionnaires, to the Long Live the Legion podcast, where we talk about the Legion of Superheroes comic book team and break subjects down so that whether you're just out of the Legion Academy or you're a longtime veteran with your own flight ring, you get to know the team a little bit better. I'm your co-host, Jim.
And I'm your co-host, Jay.
And I can't believe I'm saying this, but welcome to episode number 25.
Awesome, isn't it?
It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird. I never expected to be able to say that, honestly.
Yeah, I'll be honest. And this is a big thank you to all of our listeners or watchers. If you're checking this out on YouTube, we would not be at episode 25 without all of you and all of your support. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd be here. So thank you again. And yeah, this is amazing. This is great. So I'm going to use a little bit of hyperbole. Let's keep the best Legion podcast going and let's get into episode 25.
Yeah, we're going into year two.
Yep.
So what do we have to talk about to kick off year two?
This is great. So the Mission Monitor Board has one of the most important members in Legion history, and I would argue one of the most important superheroes in superhero history. We are going to talk about Superboy. And talking about Superboy means we're going to talk about Superman, and we're going to talk about all the different Superboys and Superboy Prime. We are going to talk Superboy. So if you're a fan of red shorts over blue tights, this is the episode for you. We're going to break everything down. So I'm going to start with a really controversial question to start, and then we'll kind of get into the character a little bit. So here's the first question. Does the Legion need to have Superboy in it?
Well, given the fact that we have the character of Mon-El and we have the character of Ultra Boy that apes a lot of the same powers, I think technically speaking, no. And I think this is one of the reasons why you see Superboy kind of stepping out from the Legion's shadow, so to speak, for most of the time, most of the 70s. I mean, even though for a good chunk of the 70s, the book is titled Superboy and the Legion, you don't see him either as a star player or you don't see him at all, right? He's just essentially a background player, even when he's the team leader. I mean, obviously there's some interesting stories in the Bronze Age that feature him, but I don't think he's really needed, honestly. I think, is he needed as an inspiration? I think that's yet another question that we could also ask.
Yes, and we will later on. I agree with you. So I think it's kind of funny that you said like Superboy needed to get out of the Legion's shadow. And was that a malapropism? Because I think the Legion needed to get out of Superboy's shadow.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of both, right? Because you had, I think in the title, the Superboy and the Legion had been taking more and more of the spotlight in that particular book, so much so that eventually they spun off and turned it into its own book, and Superboy got his own book. So, I think it's a little bit of both. You can make that argument for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I loved those early Bronze Age issues where it's Superboy starring the Legion of Superheroes. And I thought that was like the perfect way, even though the book was still called Superboy, like the publisher, right. It was still in the, I always pronounce this word wrong, indicia, in the little text, the small text at the bottom of the page. I always pronounce it wrong. And I'm sure I'm going to get tons of emails about this. It just kept saying Superboy. And it wasn't until later on that they said, yeah, we're going to include Legion in that. I think, and we talked about this last episode, I think Superboy is critically important to the Legion as inspiration. I think the idea of them being inspired by a fellow teenager is really important to the Legion, and which is why I prefer that over them being inspired by Superman. Like, I just like the idea of them going, hey, we're teenagers. Like, what makes us think that we can be superheroes and we can go help people? And they go, well, look back 1,000 years, the literal greatest superhero of all time. And I think we can call Superman the GOAT in the DC universe, right?
I think so. Yeah.
That's pretty good. He started when he was 13, 14. And I know for modern audiences, and I know especially when they got rid of Superboy in the 80s, a lot of people were like, well, this is a dumb idea. We don't need it. But I really like that as a Legion inspiration.
Yeah, no, that's cool. But I didn't know this until I was prepping for this conversation, but Superboy actually was introduced in 1936. And this is according to the Who's Who, the DC Who's Who. More Fun Comics number 101 in 1936 was where Superboy was introduced. And apparently he was 8 years old at the time in that particular story, but that was his actual first appearance. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he didn't really get the Superboy as we know Superboy today until he was more of a teenager at that point. But yeah, thought that was kind of interesting as part of the research.
Yeah. And I also think it's fascinating to me that, like, in the Silver Age, Superboy by himself was one of DC's best-selling comic books. Like, people loved reading the adventures of a teenage Superman more so than I mean, aside from those moments where Batman sales took off because they had the TV show, the Superman books and Superboy, those were the big books for DC. Like, people loved this character, which makes it even more fascinating is not the right word. I think it makes it more interesting that by the time the 70s came around, the Legion basically just took him over and shoved him to the background of his own book, and the book maintained all of its popularity. Like, yes, all the sales are dropping in the 70s. Like, every comic book sales are going down compared to the 60s. But Superboy and the Legion was like either the number 2 book or like top 5 for most of the 70s, even as the Legion were taken over. So yeah, this is a big popular character. I mean, how many TV shows has Superboy had now? Like, you had the Superboy show, you had Smallville, you had or is that it? I thought there was more. There's a bunch of animated stuff.
I want to say there was another Superboy TV show. I think there might have been a couple of them. But yeah, I mean, he's very an enduring and popular character for sure. Although, we got, like we talked about last episode with Case Aiken, they did try to get rid of him as part of the crisis and all that kind of nonsense that we were talking about, which was interesting in and of itself. I think it speaks volume that Superboy was such a popular character that they had to bring him back in some way, shape, or form, which they did, later on after 0 Hour, around the 0 Hour time frame, or after the reign of the Superman, right? And so you had Conner Kent at that point, but then eventually we got to the point where we just need to bring back Superman, meaning Clark Kent has been Superboy in his prior life, right? Whether it's the Jeff Johns instance of him just not having the, being more of a Smallville type character where he doesn't have the suit, but he goes to the future with the Legion and plays around in the suit, or the way we've kind of gone into the modern day where he was Superboy. So it's interesting to say the least, I think.
Well, that's a moment actually in the whole Jeff Johns run that confuses me a lot. And I know we'll probably say that a lot about the Jeff Johns run because like it's, at certain points they're like, okay, he was never Superboy, but then when they did Superman's Secret Origins, he was Superboy. So they were kind of retconning their own stuff as they're going, and it almost seemed like they were just, no, we need Superboy. Okay, we don't need Superboy. Okay, we need him again. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, like, I think it's always one of those moments where when DC editorial starts thinking, we have to make this realistic, is when they completely miss the idea of the character.
Right.
And they go, well, there's no way he'd be a teenager. And it would be obvious if he's in Smallville and there's Superboy and then he moves to Metropolis and he's Superman and it's Clark Kent's in both, everybody would figure it out. And you kind of go, well, yeah, but look, if you're going to accept that I can't tell Clark Kent and Superman apart because of glasses and a haircut, you have to accept everything else. Like, you just have to accept the reality of this universe that they've created, right? Like, and just have fun with it. So, it's the same. Like, and I've mentioned this in a number of my columns, like, every single time somebody goes back to the past, when the Legion comes back to the past, or when somebody goes forward, the amount of like problems that raises is tremendous, but you just have to accept, like, okay, this is just how things are working. And that's actually another reason why I really loved Superboy in the Legion, the Clark Kent version, is because Superboy was always, are we going to say 20 years earlier than the regular Superman books? Like, does that make sense? So if Superman was in his 70s,
if Clark is in if Superman Clark is in his 30s, like early 30s, then yeah, so 15 to 20 years, I think makes sense.
Yeah, and so it was kind of like, I mean, and I know this is going to sound crazy to say, it was kind of almost like Superboy was in his own alternate universe anyways, where nothing mattered, because you knew that, like, he's showing up in the Legion. He's never going to die. That he's never going to, there is no change that's going to happen to him that's going to be permanent.
Yeah, he has the ultimate plot armor, right?
Yeah, and then he would go back, and you knew that his hometown would never change. Like, Smallville was always, this innocent place that they'd kind of pull him from. And so, I mean, if you want to make another defense for the alternate universe storyline, that's it. I always really liked it. And yet, ironically enough, as I was a kid reading these books, when he would show up, I remember as a kid thinking, okay, enough. Like, can we see the other characters? Like, can you focus on somebody else? Because that's always been one of the, I think that's always been one of the problems of having Superboy, especially Clark Kent Superboy in the Legion. Although I can argue that the John Kent in the Legion would maybe worse.
We'll get there.
He sucks all the air out of the room.
Yeah.
And you don't get to see, you don't get to elevate other characters. So it's like you said at the very beginning, like, well, Mon-El and Ultra Boy have the same powers. And I think we talked about that last episode. Like, Ultra Boy on any other super team is destroying everyone. Like, if you put Ultra Boy on the Teen Titans, he's the most powerful character, and it's not even close. Just physical strength wise, I think, I'm sure he and Starfire could.
I was going to say Starfire would probably give him a run for his money in many ways.
Yeah, but and that was kind of the thing, and so, or I think of like those early Bronze Age Carrie Bates stories where they always had to start in Smallville, and then there'd be you'd get like, it's an 8-page story, you always have a page and a half of just trying to get Superboy into the future, and I'm like, nobody wants to see this. Like, that's not why we're reading this comic. Like, get him there, and it was that catch-22 of having him on the title, is that he got you credibility, but then he also took a bunch off the table.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things with that, because I mean, at the time, these were, especially in the Silver Age and to a lesser extent the Bronze Age, these were just mechanisms to sell books, right? To have, Superboy, and he's with the Legion, so that's a character we recognize. It's going to sell more books. That's fine. That's great. And I get that, but I think would have been more interesting, and I think that the animated series from 2005-06 really hits this home in the exact right way, and I'm hoping that we get to see this in the I guess the current run of action that has the Superboy focus, and this kind of gets into the discussion of why Superboy needs the Legion, right? The idea of the Legion being used as teachers for Clark to learn how to hero, right? I think is a huge, I guess, benefit for Clark, and then I think this is where the animated series really worked, because even though we're calling him Superman, and that was all due to licensing issues and stuff like that, it's Superboy. And more importantly, it's a Superboy who does not have much experience. And him going into the future and having these adventures with the Legion really does a lot to hone his skills, to teach him what it means to actually really be a hero. And you think about it, it's when we're talking about some of these seminal stories, right? The Fatal Five and the Sun Eater story, right, is huge, and he witnesses the sacrifice of Pharaoh Lad. So he learns about sacrifice, he learns about heroism, all that kind of stuff, which he already had, right? I mean, I think Clark already has these traits inside of him, these attributes, but actually having the attributes and then learning how to use them are two different things. And I think this is where it's so important for him to have the Legion as part of his experience.
I agree. And you covered that aspect perfectly. The other aspect I thought that was really important, and I think John's got onto this, and we've seen it a few different times, is the idea of like, this is the only place where he could kind of let loose. Like, he didn't have to hide who he was. He didn't, and the part of the Superboy mythos has always been like, he couldn't play sports because he knew he would beat everybody, and he couldn't show off how smart he was, and he could never express himself properly, and finally he gets to go to the Legion, and he can be that person, and so then the confidence level grows up, and I think you're right, and I think I really like that they've done this. They've made it so Superman or Superboy needed the Legion just as much as the Legion needed him, as far as like, not even, I don't want to say giving them credibility, but like as that inspiration, like, and the other one, and I really hope they get into this a little bit more, and I've only seen little bits and pieces, is when you're the strongest guy in the world and you can do whatever you want and you're kind of not afraid, and you think like heroism kind of, I don't want to say is easy, but like if you go, like, let's say he's got to rescue somebody from a burning building. There's at no point does Superman go, okay, I might get hurt here. And the Legion, with all the different power levels and all the different, just imagine if you're Superboy and you're like, hey, here's Duo Damsel, who literally has no, like, the only thing she can do is split into, well, let's say Triplicate Girl at the time, split into 3 different people, doesn't have super strength, isn't invulnerable, isn't anything. And she's jumping into risk just like everybody else. And I think that's an important one for Superboy to learn as well. Like, heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and I think it grounds him all.
Yeah, I agree, because especially when the threats get bigger, right? As here's another aspect of Clark really needing to have this experience when he becomes Superman, and we're in the mainstream DC universe, regardless of which era we're talking about. He is he's one of the Trinity, right, of the Justice League. He is effectively the leader of the Justice League, whether official or not. And that's where, the Legion is where he gets to learn to be a team player.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
With other superheroes.
Because just imagine if he had never learned that. He's on the
Right.
JLA and he looks at somebody like Green Arrow. Nothing against Green Arrow, but like, if you're Superman, you're like, yeah, there's nothing you can do, dude. Like, what's your value? And instead, he's learned the value of what everybody can bring to a team. And it's
and I mean, and this is where it gets interesting when you bring in the discussion of the Byrne era, right? The John Byrne era, is that, arguably when you make a scenario where Clark is not Superboy, it was Superboy, all those attributes are basically instilled into him by his parents, by John and Martha, which is great. You know what I mean? It's a scenario where it's important that you have these very good human foster parents that are instilling all these values that makes this person the most heroic person of the age in the world. So that's good. It's a good piece and a good beat of the character. But I still think you need to have that experience. And obviously I understand that the part of the Byrne era, I guess reason for being was that you had this, relatively inexperienced Superman who was still kind of learning on the job. But I think it's still more important to have that Legion training in the background. And I think, granted, again, the Byrne era was hugely important and hugely impactful in so many ways to the character and to his reflection in society as we see Superman today, that you can't understate it. But, I still think that it really needed that Legion part in the mix there, I should say.
Yeah. I think I've said this before, and I'll repeat myself because God knows I love doing that. Just ask my wife. I think it was really that Byrne era, that decision to get rid of Superboy. I understand why they did it. And there was two logical reasons behind it. And the first one was, for the vast majority of people, Superman was the Christopher Reeve movie, and there was no Superboy in that, right? So there just
as
wasn't.
As far as we knew, right? It's one of those things where you could have played with that in so many different ways, and you could still have said, there is a Superboy, we're just not showing him. You know what I mean?
And oddly enough, the other reason was that, for all we talked about how Superboy was an integral character and sold a lot, by the time Man of Steel came out, like that Superboy book, The New Adventures of Superboy, that did not sell. It did not do well. It was not the audience did not care. And you can blame a number of reasons for that. And I mean, one would be I don't want to say I don't think it was a good creative team, but I think that's the nicest way I can just say. It's like, these weren't good comics, and they weren't reaching an audience. And so DC's like, why do we need this character anymore? I think the other one as well, and this is the part that I've said before, is like, we didn't realize what we missed until he was gone. It's that new Coke thing, right? Where like you do this, and then suddenly everyone's like, wait. And it was the same with Supergirl. There's one quote, and I forget where I read this, but after they killed Supergirl, everybody freaked out, and DC's like, well, nobody bought her book. Like, what? Like, why do you care? Like, nobody cared about this character. We couldn't sell a Supergirl comic. And then they kill her, and suddenly like tens of thousands of people are freaking out, and they're like, well, did you buy her book? And they're like, well, no, it wasn't good. And they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? So it's there's that, right? Let's just keep talking about Clark. We kind of jumped into the 80s, and I want to go back a little bit. Because every time we talk about these characters, we always talk about like how they joined the Legion. And it's funny with Superboy, like it's literally one of the 5 most important Legion comics of all time, even though reading it now, it has not aged well. And it's kind of funny. I just did a reread of I think it was Adventure Comics when I got 2008. They reprinted this Adventure Comics 247, the first appearance. Right. And you read it now and you're like, ooh, like this is. I know
it's basically what you learn from reading that story is that teenagers are assholes.
Yes,
regardless of when in history we're talking about them.
Yeah. So they bully Clark to the point where he cries, and they there's literally a scene where there's a tear coming down his eye or coming down his face, and he's like, I can't believe I didn't make the team. And then they're like, ha ha ha, we're just joking. Yeah. Apparently sexism hasn't gone away in the 30th century, because there's the great line where they go, where Saturn Girl beats Superboy, and I think it's either Lightning Lad or Cosmic Boy who says like, well, you got beat by a girl. Right. It's like, 1958.
Yeah.
1958. Luckily, they've cleaned that up more recently. Like Secret Origins changed it, and I'm sure they're going to get another change to it as well, and they make it a lot nicer, and they make it you get rid of a lot of that crap. Yeah, it's a seminal issue for the Legion. I mean, you got to read it if you haven't, just to kind of see where everybody came from. And sorry, I said Lightning Lad before. It's Lightning
Boy. That's right.
Right. So they didn't even know that. And then Cosmic Boy's powers come out of his eyes. That's another nice touch.
Yeah, and he has that wacky helmet. But yeah, I mean, so how do you think he changes? Because obviously he's going to be changing, because we have all these different writers between 1958 and the 70s. How do you think he's changed for the better across that time period, or does he?
So, I mean, one of the things about Silver Age comics, and I'm going to say this knowing I'm going to piss off a lot of fans of Silver Age comics, is there's not a lot of change. Like, they tend to just be stuck in mud. The stories, and I'd say not until Jim Shooter takes over, where he actually starts playing around with the characters. But I don't think, I mean, Superboy's kind of I mean, as I was doing my research for this, there's those things of how much kryptonite is in the 30th century, because that just seems to be this standard problem, and nobody thought of how to hey, let's think of another way to do this. And the characters just kind of stay the same. I don't think it's until, you mentioned the Sun Eater story, and I think the Mordru story, when they go back to Smallville, and it's Superboy, and I think there's 3 or 4 other Legionnaires. And that's when you start seeing Superboy growing a little bit and kind of getting, actually becoming a bit of a character. But I think DC didn't want him to change. I think they just wanted Superboy to be Superboy.
Yeah.
And so they could play around the edges. They could play a little bit with the Legionnaires. I don't think Superboy really starts growing. I mean, I hate to always keep going back to Levitz being the greatest Legion writer, but I don't think he starts really growing until there's those moments where he shows up, and he's not there often, but when he does pop in, you can tell Levitz has put a lot of thought into this, and I think he does a really good job. But I mean, it's like I said, I think Cary Bates just wanted to write your standard Superboy story. I don't think he brought a lot to that. Please disagree and tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking that from a comic book writer's perspective and a publisher's perspective, I guess probably more importantly, you want to have a fairly stable characterization so that you don't lose readers or you have something consistent. But of course, that's in the model of the comic book industry, where they expect readers to be churning through every few years. So that's not as important, especially in the older comic books. But now it's a little bit of a different story. So I think that has a good chunk to do with it. But I mean, I was thinking the same thing with regards to characterization, where you don't get any real meat on the bone, so to speak, until you really start reading the Levitz stories, even the first run of Levitz.
Yeah. Well, just imagine if they'd said with Superboy, they did the same thing they did with Supergirl. I found it funny that Supergirl could be in a relationship with Brainiac 5, and that starts very, very early on. They, right from the moment those two first join, and the writers are like, hey, we've got Supergirl, but let's have her, romantically attached to the descendant of one of Superman's biggest villains.
Right.
But why couldn't they have said, hey, let's have a little bit of fun here. We know that Superboy and Lana Lang are this kind of relationship, but it's always weird to read because are they dating? Are they not? What's going on? And if they had said, hey, let's have Superboy, I'm trying to think of who would have been the perfect, I mean, obviously Triplicate Girl would have been the choice, because she's the one who, had the crush. But I mean, are you telling me that none of these teenage girls, when Superboy walks into the room, they wouldn't immediately been like, okay, here's the best looking, most interesting guy I'm going to meet? And just imagine if you had done something and said, well, I'll pick this because it does actually tie to a Silver Age story. There was the Silver Age story where Supergirl is trying to pick the best wives for Superman. Do you remember this?
Right.
And Saturn Girl was one of them. And she goes forward, and Saturn Girl's like, yeah, I'm married to Lightning Lad. But no, that's, and they've actually kind of, I mean, they tease this, in the most recent Superman issues, where Saturn Girl's reads Superman's mind and is like, oh, you had a crush on me when you were 15. And I mean, why not play with that a little bit? Have Superboy just be like, yeah, Lana's great, but here's this, here's this girl. And she actually turns him down because she's wanting to be with Lightning Lad. You could have had so much fun with that. But of course, it's the Silver Age, and you can't
exactly. I mean,
play with it.
Although the other thing that I think is played with to some degree in Silver and Bronze Ages, but it's really kind of weird, is that you see a lot of, especially in the Who's Who's entries and things like that, write-ups more about the characters versus the stories themselves, where you see that there's a lot of hero worship towards Superboy.
Yeah.
But when you actually read the stories, especially when you have the whole Mon-El and Ultra Boy relationships, it's very much more buddy buddy. But then again, we're talking about these little cliques that form in the Legion, where folks like that core group, especially Mon-El and especially Ultra Boy, who've been in Smallville in the past, that know him on a little bit more of a personal and fundamental level, have that better relationship versus a lot of the other ones, like say like Shrinking Violet, right? I'm sure she looks at Clark in much more of a hero worship fashion, even though of course there's stories of them having fun and dancing and all that kind of stuff too. So another interesting, I guess, way of looking at the character.
Exactly. It's again, the only time they did anything like that, and it kind of, I don't even want to say took it seriously, was now it's a funny story when you read it and you think, oh, isn't this cute? When he meets Laurel Kent in early Bronze Age, and he's immediately smitten because she looks exactly like Lois Lane. He's just like, oh, this is a perfect woman. And then it becomes revealed that this is his like great granddaughter.
Right.
And she has his invulnerability. And then you go back and when you reread it, knowing that you're like, okay, this is so wrong and so like just so wrong. And it's like something like that. Like, why didn't they have, like, they could have, especially when they got to the Bronze Age, I think they could have had a lot of fun. I mean, I would have loved to have seen a Bronze Age story, and they would have never done this, of Superboy, who's from the 50s or early 60s, flying into Mike Grell's everybody is wearing almost no clothing Legion. And let's say Superboy is like a 16-year-old boy. Like, you can't tell me he's not just like,
yeah, right. Exactly. Like hormone alert.
Yeah, like he would just be going bananas at that point. And it would have been a great, I mean, I know it's not something anybody's going to write about Superboy, but it would have been such a fun story. So there's that. Okay, speaking of fun stories, let's just stick with Clark and we'll keep on us. What were your favorite Clark Kent Superboy moments in the Legion?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the Fatal Five Sun Boy, or the Fatal Five and Sun Eater story, right? So I mentioned that one. The other one is, from things that I thought of immediately when I was thinking about what are the stories that I think about from a Superboy perspective, is the wedding special. Just because even though the main story is really about the wedding of Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl, it's framed from Superboy's point of view, pretty much, for the entire story. So that is something I just always think about as being a Superboy story more than a Legion story, ironically enough. And then the other one that I really think about is issue 259, which is the issue where Superboy officially leaves, I guess, if you want to call it that, right? Because that's the turnover where the Legion gets their own title, basically. So I think those three are the ones that really stand out, aside from obviously the introduction story, the Adventure Comics introduction 247, and then the story that we talked about last episode where it talks about his death. Those are the ones that I would kind of call. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, great choices. It's kind of funny when you mentioned the wedding special. I actually think one of Superboy's best appearances is the Duo Damsel Bouncing Boy wedding issue 200.
I was thinking about picking that one too, but the the Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl one.
And it does set up the horrible way Duo Damsel treats Bouncing Boy.
Yeah.
It's so many different things. Like, I remember the first time I read it, I go, really? The guy's getting married and he can't save his own fiance? Like, he gets shoved to the background so Superboy can do everything. But I mean, Superboy really shines in that. You mentioned the Fatal Five. I think that's great. I love the Mordru. I mentioned that as well. I love there's that issue where he faces the ghost of Pharaoh Lad.
Yes.
And that's a big super. I remember reading this going like, this is the Silver Age, and this is Silver Age DC. Like, holy cow! And they go back to it again when like the Legion clones show up, which is just a horrible, like, it's a horrible concept. But again, Superboy has to deal with this loss. The other two that I wanted. So the other three that I wanted to kind of talk about that you didn't mention. So I really like the issue where Ultra Boy goes back to Smallville, and it's this mystery of who is this guy.
Yeah, that was the Ultra Boy introduction, right?
Yeah, the Ultra Boy
Yeah, I was
introduction
thinking
and
about that one too. It's a
the way
great story.
Superboy gets it's handled in that. I know we've done a ton about the Reflector saga. I will always have a soft spot for that amazing moment where he gets blasted by Grimbor and the mask comes off and that full page shot.
Yeah, it's
And you
iconic.
see
It is iconic. Absolutely.
yeah, and the cover that George Perez did
Yep.
for the next issue where he's flying, like those are just these, yeah, iconic's a really good word. And look, we laud the Great Darkness Saga a ton. And on this podcast, like we've purposely been putting off talking about the Great Darkness Saga because there's just so many good things to say about it. But I really love the way they use Superboy in that they don't overuse him. So like
exactly.
That one, I remember like that first issue where they're investigating the theft of, I think it's Excalibur, and he's talking to brand new Invisible Kid, like who's just joined the Legion. And so you have, Jacques, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Jacques Faucard, like talking to Superboy. And Superboy is this super welcoming, like, hey, I'm glad you're on the team. Like, this is awesome. You deserve it. And here's this guy like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And then in the final battle, the fact that Brainiac 5 comes up with the circuitry so the red sun doesn't affect him. And there's those iconic shots of him and Supergirl punching Darkseid. And like, just that's how you want Superboy to be in a Legion comic. I loved all of that, just the way they handled it.
You made that comment there, and I couldn't agree with you more, because after Superboy, officially leaves and goes back into the past, like you mentioned, they bring him back, but it's just like it's a nice little seasoning, right? If you're making a really good meal, right? They just bring him back for just certain moments, and when they do, it is for a good reason, and it's portrayed very well. I couldn't agree with you more with that statement.
Yeah. No, it's the way I like him being used in the Legion. Like he doesn't need to be in every issue. He's treated like every other Legionnaire.
Yeah.
So they get their appearances. Okay, now the negative. What would you say are the parts of Clark Kent's appearances in the Legion that didn't work for you?
That's actually a tough question, because I don't think there was anything that was really, really glaringly bad for me that I just didn't like. I thought, if you just want to talk about like a kind of a bad, weird story, right? I think even though the story is interesting, of the introduction of Surprise and Mysterious, the whole little MacGuffin of Superboy and Supergirl saying, "Oh, we got to leave the team," which we see over and over again, was just kind of like, okay, it's fine. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were just talking about how Superboy's been used is that when I was kind of going through a lot of the Bronze Age stories before, while he was actually, in a lot of the stories, he was just kind of one of the guys. It wasn't like there was anything special about him, right? He was just part of the team. And so I did appreciate that. But honestly, I'm not sure if I can think of like a story that I absolutely hated that had Superboy in it.
Yeah, no, I think they handled him with a ton of respect, and because they couldn't really play with the character that much. You don't get any issues where where it's just that cringe, like, I can't believe you're doing that. Like I already mentioned the Laurel Kent story, which I think might be the worst one, just for when you think about it.
And that's only because of the weird situation, right?
Yeah, I wish they had a better story to write him off the team. Like I think the Psycho Warrior story isn't very good. I mean, it just seemed like this was the easiest way to do it, and like it would have been. Like they could have done something. I mean, again, it's the Bronze Age. They're not going to have Mordru show up and say, like, if you come back to the 30th century, I'm going to kill your parents. Like that just wasn't going to be in there. But you kind of wish there had been something. Like, I mean, I think a good story would have been something like the Fatal Five go back to Smallville. Lana gets hurt, and Superboy's like, I can't leave her alone. Like, I've got to protect my friends.
Yeah.
And you still could have got that thread instead of this, like, oh, I've seen my parents' death and blah, blah, blah. Well,
yeah.
Saturn Girl's been wiping his memory for decades.
Right. I was going to mention that. It's like, come on, man.
They could have just done that, right?
And it's like, yeah, your parents are going to die. Everybody is going to die at some point in time, Superboy. You need to learn this lesson at some point. So
yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that's also weird to me is that, his memory's getting wiped, which I guess, the answer to this is the memories of specifically what happens are getting wiped, but not the knowledge of the fact that there is a Legion in the future, because, there's the whole shtick of him having the statuettes in the basement, right? In this hidden lab where he has his robot clones and all that kind of weirdness. But that always was a kind of a weird thing. But I guess I understand they have to do it. right? Because he can't know that cause and effect and timey-wimey. And
it's a good thing there's never any break-ins in Smallville. Because just imagine, because I can't imagine security systems were all that great. So somebody gets into that basement, they're like,
yeah,
this is
nothing good crowbar can't fix. Exactly.
Yeah, it's. I would say, just to go back to the only thing that I didn't like about Superboy, and it wasn't a Legion thing. It was more just how many different stories is he. I mean, I hate how many different stories is he essentially lying to Lana's face or doing something really horrible to her. I keep going back to they're out, they're doing they're always doing homework, right? They're doing homework and he gets the call. So he zaps an apple, it falls on her head, knocks her out. I'm like, okay, so you've just given her a concussion so you can go fly off rather than any other, hey, I just realized I got to go work in my dad's shop, or I promised I got to go. Nope, I'm going to cause you permanent brain damage just so that I can go fly.
Well, that's right. She becomes a Legionnaire, so it's fine, right?
Yes. So yes, it's when Insect Queen shows up. And you're like, all right. And then we always talk about this as well, connected characters to Clark. And I think there's the obvious ones, right? Like his connection to Mon-El.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Right. I mean, essentially they're brothers. And that's, one of the best, can we say one of the best friendships, especially in sure. Silver Age, Bronze Age
100%.
comics? It's just so well done.
Yeah.
And same with Ultra Boy, he's buddies with Ultra Boy as well. But Mon-El's the big one.
Yep, for sure.
And again, we talked about it as well, the connection to Triplicate Girl. And I didn't Shadowlass have a little crush on Superboy at some point in this? I thought she kind of went after every guy in the Legion when she first got introduced.
Point. Triplicate Girl is the one that really jumps out, obviously. But, but then I always just kind of jump over, okay, well, there's Lana and then Lori Lamaris, of course.
Yeah,
the mermaid. Definitely, from those other characters who may or may not be Legion adjacent, right? So
yes,
are some of his other big relationships, of course. And then Pete Ross, obviously.
Yeah, if only Livorno had known that her last name had to start with an L, and then she would have been perfect for him.
That's right. It would have worked.
Unfortunately, it was that horrible D, and then she's done. It's Superman is only interested in women whose both first and last names are L's. The one other character that I wanted to say that was connected to Superman in a really weird, or Superboy in a really weird way, is Ken Shakespeare.
True.
Right? Because when Superboy dies, and then we get into 5 years later, and again, we're not going to get into all of this, but Ken Shakespeare essentially becomes the Superboy analog in 5 years later. And I know they've played a lot with his Kryptonian heritage recently. He's in that category of characters that they could have done so much with and they never really did. And there was just so much stuff going on in 5 years later that him getting kind of moved to the sidelines wasn't a big shock. But yeah, he's kind of the big one as well that I was going to go with.
No, good call. Yeah, because I always seem to forget about poor Kent, but
I think most people do.
Yeah, until you read 5 years later, you're just like, okay.
Yeah, and also, he pops up every once in a while, but, I don't even, I shouldn't say this. I don't even remember him popping up in Legion of Three Worlds, even as, a reference point.
No, the only time I ever really remember seeing him was when Chris Batista drew him in Legion, in the Abnett and Lanning run.
Yeah, those famous glasses, which make no sense in the 31st century, but it's how everybody knows him. So
exactly.
I'll make this case as we're kind of talking about the new Legion. Why not, get him back in there somewhere? He has his fans. I think it's a key thing.
Does he?
Don't make him a Kryptonian. Sorry. There's too many. Sorry, you don't need him? Maybe there's just too many Kryptonians. I think maybe that's the problem. Okay. All right. Let's move into the next Superboy, which is where you saw Superboy in the Legion when you started reading them. And that's, right. Is it Con-El or Connor? What are we calling him?
So, yeah, I guess Connor is where we end up calling him, more commonly, so to speak. But yeah, so this would be the Superboy that was introduced in the Reign of the Superman storyline in the Superman titles back, I guess, just after the Death of Superman storyline. And this particular Superboy is a clone of, let me make sure I get this right, a clone of Lex Luthor spliced with some Kryptonian DNA, I think is how that works, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And so, yeah, so is the kind of this cocky, arrogant kid. And of course, he takes the Superboy name once the kind of the dust settles from the Reign of the Superman battle, gets his own title, and then ends up getting affiliated with the Legion. So at the time, I was actually a big reader of the Triangle era, having been introduced to it with the Death and Return story before I started reading the Legion. So I was very well aware of and familiar with this particular Superboy from the kind of the get-go, whereas I hadn't really been as steeped with the history of the prior incarnation. Of course, I knew Superboy, right? Who didn't really? But I wasn't as into the character as I was with this particular person that we started to eventually come to know as Conner Kent over time, because I'd been there since his beginning. It's kind of like how I'm a Tim Drake Robin fan, right? Because I was there right when Tim was introduced on the page, and so it's kind of the same way with this character. But yeah, so he has his own adventures in the current day, right? Obviously, he has his own title, but eventually he ends up meeting the Legion because he's directly involved with bringing Valor, I guess the Mon-El of that particular time period, into the 30th century. So that's how he gets involved with the reboot Legion.
Yep. And so he goes forward in time. And so I just make this mention for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm assuming if you're listening to a Legion podcast, you do. Valor becomes the motivation for the Legion, right? In the reboot, like he kind of takes the Superboy role as the guy everybody kind of wants to be like.
Well, it was more like it's a little bit more different than that, more nuanced, because the inspiration of the heroism was really more from R.J. Brand's, pointing back to the Age of Heroes. But Valor was this kind of a religious figure because he was the seer of worlds. So in this particular continuity, all the superpowers from of characters of races in the future were essentially humans seeded onto all these other worlds by Valor. So like Brawlians and Imskians and all those folks were originally humans placed there and on these worlds by Valor, and then they adapted to their environment. So that's how that was supposed to go.
Thank you for clarifying that. I always go for the short version.
So he's viewed with this reverence, right? He's viewed with this reverence of like a religious figure, and in fact, Triad. So to echo that particular, I guess, relationship, Triad is very devout in her belief in Valor, and so there's a whole hero worship thing when that happens, when he comes into the future. But we're not here to talk about Valor. We're here to talk about Superboy.
Now, to me, the fascinating thing that they did with this is they made everybody, I don't want to say hate Superboy, but they turned Superboy into like an irritant for the Legion. Like, and there are moments where I think it's justified, and there's moments where I don't quite understand why they're so negative. Like, I think this is always a tough one because like I wasn't reading the Superman books at this point. So like, I don't know when Conner stopped being guy in leather jacket with a bad haircut, living in Hawaii, and suddenly became just guy in t-shirt, and what personality changes came. But like, so when he's in the leather jacket, he is being annoying to the Legion, like those stories. And it kind of makes sense why the Legion is, okay, you're like, shut up and leave us alone. But when we get to the second version, he's just being a teenage hero. Like Cosmic Boy just seems to go out of his way to treat him like absolute garbage. So can you shine a light on that? Can you explain, like, what did I miss?
I think this is where, I was not collecting everything at this particular time, but I'm not mistaken. I think when he switched from the kind of that punk leather jacket look into the t-shirt and jeans look that we see, and which is also quite famous, I think that was around the time he was in the Teen Titans, or was affiliated with Teen Titans and Young Justice. So, and I think, they just kind of evolved his character. He was always a little bit cocky though, so I don't think that ever changed. But that was the character that we got to know when he was brought into the future that we talked about on the Foundations episode.
Yes.
Several months ago. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm referring to, like that Foundation storyline where I remember like reading the story going like, what is he doing wrong? I don't get why Cosmic Boy just has this like absolute hatred for the kid, and that's why I kept going like, did I miss something? Like,
I think they were just playing that up, honestly, because he was. I mean, it was just they were just showing Superboy being impulsive, which he is, and that's always been kind of part of the character. Whereas you have Rock was just, I think they were just dialing up Rock's being a bit of a jerk, just a little bit more than they should have, in my opinion. But
and it really just needed like a page of dialogue of Rock going like, yeah, you're not Superboy. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like that's all they actually kind of needed. Like, if they just said, like, you're not Clark Kent. Like, why are you wearing the symbol? Like, you don't deserve this. And I think I would have been like, yeah, I get that. Like, I'm on board for that. But they didn't even give us that. Like, it was
Yeah.
just more, yeah, I'm just going to treat you like crap.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say nasty things about you, both to your face and behind your back. And I'm not going to. And I was like, wait, this is Rock. Like, and also in this version of the Legion, Rock literally forgives everybody who does anything bad to him.
I know,
Like,
right? That's where it just seems kind of a little bit out of left field and
yeah, it was just like, this isn't this character. But I will say this, and looking back at the Legion, I'm not gonna lie, I wish we'd seen more Superboy in this. Like, as much as they had too many characters, and they're like, they just kept throwing new characters. Like, instead of doing Lori Morning, or instead of doing Thunder, or instead of doing all of these other characters, like, why not say, like, hey, we're gonna pull Superboy in every so often, and
and I guess one of the things that's important about this particular Superboy is that his power set is very, very different from Superman, or even the prior Superboy, especially. Whereas the classic Silver Age, Bronze Age Superboy was extremely powerful. As we talked about last episode, the more modern Byrne era Superman was not nearly as powerful as that. And this clone Superboy has what they call tactile telekinesis, which is what really makes him super strong and fast and all that other stuff that he'd be able to do superpowers with. So it's very, very different. And so he's the kind of character, because that power set's very different, he doesn't take up that much air out of the room, like you mentioned earlier, to borrow your phrase. And the stories tend to work a little bit better. So I agree. I think they should have had a lot more use of him that they should have. But I think, ironically, I think the Abnett and Lanning folks did it best, because it was this, they used the timeline properly, where they could say, yeah, Superboy just came to the future and we're trying to figure out where to dump him. But, in the meantime, he can just kind of hang out. And whenever we figure out where to return him to, we can do that. And so you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, we have to send him back at the end of the issue to exactly where we brought him back from. Right. Yeah. So you can play with him, and you can have these kind of long form stories that have him as a team member. And I think that really worked pretty well.
Yeah. The only issue, of course, is if he spends like 2 years in the future, and then he goes back to the exact same time he's left, and he's like, who are you again? It's like, don't you remember I'm Beast Boy? Like, it's like, who?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a comic book, a year of comic book continuity, or a year of comic book stories in our time reflects about a month of time in the comic book universe, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you have to have a lot of stories to be able to do that.
It would be funny. Yeah, it was. And then, so this Superboy dies fighting Superboy Prime. And then in Legion of Three Worlds, there is this incredibly convoluted and incredibly dumb plan to regrow him in a Kryptonian birth chamber in the Fortress of Solitude. And we're supposed to believe that Superman never noticed.
I don't know, man.
Like, it's so anyway, so they bring him back to life in this incredibly convoluted and really insane way. And he's kind of there. So he shows up, he's in like the stuff that I'm rereading right now, where he's showing up in the Last Stand of New Krypton, and he's working with all the Legionnaires. And I gotta be honest, like, as much as I dislike the way they're handling the Legion, I do kind of like seeing him and Supergirl with the Legion. Like, it is it's a nice thing to see. And I think they're handling him really well, aside from I mean, like, I can nitpick anything, but again, he's kind of one of those, I just wish they had done a little bit more with him. Yeah. And I get that he was tied to the Teen Titans and he was a member, but like, they could have had some fun.
Yeah. I mean, it got to the point where it's when you look at as an almost mirror image, I guess, when you look at the Batman titles and you see all the Robins, right, where you have Dick Grayson, you have Tim Drake, you have Jason Todd, and you have, of course, now you have Damian. And at some point, one of these characters is going to get lost in the shuffle. And ironically, I guess, in the case of both the Superman and the Batman family, the 90s era character is the one that gets lost in the shuffle, because, Tim Drake kind of gets lost for a bit and does this Red Robin shtick, which is like, okay, whatever. And then, like you're mentioning, this, the Conner Kent Superboy he's just kind of an appendage almost, He's just kind of there and gets lost in the shuffle when you have actual John Kent, Superman's actual son, taking up the mantle of Superboy. Yeah. It's a little bit weird, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've mentioned this more than a few times. It does seem like anybody who was created in the 90s, there's been a bunch of people at DC who are like, we want to get rid of these people as quickly as possible. I mean, I think Kyle Rayner's kind of been shoved to the sidelines, and never known what to do with Wally West, although I think they just brought him back, and I never know, like, because you could argue that his peak was probably late 80s, early 90s, like especially the Mark Waid Flash. That's right.
Although
Wade
it seems like
Franco?
a lot of the stuff is coming back, so that's
Yeah.
we'll have to see.
Yeah, and hopefully, like, people who love these characters, and again, like, they're really good characters. Like, I agree with. It's kind of funny. Like, for me, Tim Drake is Robin,
Right.
and because like let's be honest, if you read any, we're gonna go off on an aside here. I don't get the fandom for Jason Todd. He was a horrible character in the 80s, and I didn't want to see him come back.
Agree.
But let's get back to the Legion, and let's get back to Superboy. It's so funny. The other one that I always kind of had trouble wrapping my head around as I'm reading a lot of this Conner Kent stuff, especially when they do the retro boot Legion, is he's 16 and all the Legionnaires are 20 in their 20s. Let's just go that.
Yeah. Early 20s.
Right. And again, like, if I'm a 22-year-old superhero from the 31st century and Conner Kent tries to tell me to do something, like, is my response just like, yeah, shut up, kid? Like, I've been doing this since before you, and you get all these scenes where he's awesome at everything and Supergirl's awesome at everything, and then Sensor Girl, who has more experience than both of them combined, is just like, what do I do? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And it's not even a power set issue. It's just an experience thing. It's that sucking the air out of the room thing. Yeah. It's that, like, these are the marquee characters.
So speaking of sucking the air out of the room, talk a little bit about Superboy Prime.
Okay. I'm going to try to say something nice, and then I'm going to, and then we'll be negative for the rest of the podcast. I think okay, what's the nicest thing I can say?
Well, this is speaking volumes, the fact that you're taking this long to say something nice.
I don't have a lot of experience with I don't have a lot of experience reading a lot of Superboy Prime stuff. Yeah. So my experience comes from either what he did in Legion of Three Worlds or what he's been doing recently. Yeah. I think the moment you have a character who can literally punch a hole in realities, you've overpowered him to the nth degree. But I will say this, like, I actually don't have a problem with the concept of an evil Kryptonian who's the evil version of Superman or Superboy. And there's so much fun stuff they could do with it. It just seems that they just want to make him Deadpool. Yeah. And they need to do, like, they could be doing so much more. Like, it's really weird. Like, when I was reading Legion of Three Worlds and he's set up as this big villain and there's so much stuff that's going on, I was like, yeah, this could actually be really, really cool. Like, here's the team going up against the guy who's their inspiration. Let's play with that. And instead, it just doesn't happen. And you kind of go like, meh. Yeah. Like, it's just there. So, I mean, the nicest thing that I can say is I think there's a lot of potential. They can have a lot of fun with this guy. I just think they've taken it in a way that, and like, maybe it's just I'm old and I don't want to read, like, I just don't want to read. I don't want to read a Kryptonian Deadpool. Maybe that's what it is, and that's where I am.
Yeah, no, that's a good comparison, because I think, yeah, I mean, we already have Ambush Bug, right? And Ambush Bug does a much better job of that than Superboy Prime does, I think. But yeah, I agree, and my experience is very similar. It's really focused around his Legion adjacent appearances, which is mainly Legion of Three Worlds, and again, it was a story that I didn't appreciate so much, just because the story, even though it was, Legion of Three Worlds is the name of the story, it just ended up being a Superman versus Superboy Prime knockout story where the Legion was just cannon fodder for all the death that was going to happen in that story. So I was just not as thrilled about it, even though the art was fantastic. So yeah, so there's that. But this sets us up, and apparently he also had a really good story in the death metal storyline. But I wasn't, when that was published, I wasn't really as wide read as I am today with the current DC lineup. So at some point I'm going to go back and consume that, because I understand he had a pretty good arc in that particular story. But I guess where we see him today is he is directly involved in the all-in efforts going on at DC. So he's part of he was, I guess, reintroduced in the Legion of Darkseid storyline that we covered recently. And this looks to be, based on what we saw and from hearing and reading interviews with Joshua Williamson, this seems to be some kind of a redemption arc, is what it appears to be on the page. But we'll have to see once it all gets published to see how it ends up.
Yeah, I mean, I think redeeming the character is going to be a tough slog. Like, I mean, I don't know how you can, I mean, how do you wipe away that? I mean, there's that one line I just remember from him. He's like, well, those are old stories. How do we know I even killed anybody? But then anybody who grew up reading like those appearances in adventure comics where he's literally threatening his parents and he's killed the girl who's supposedly his girlfriend. And it's dark, dark, dark. And you're like, okay, I don't care about this guy. Like, I don't want to see a redemption arc. Like, if you want to give me a redemption arc for, like, it would be like, I don't want to see the Joker get a redemption arc. Like, he's done too much. Like, if you want to do, or Luther, like, that's just like, and that's kind of how you've written Prime for 30 odd years.
I know.
Like,
that's the thing. But I will counter that by saying, I totally agree with somebody like Lex or the Joker. But there's, I guess, the two things that I would say, and not that I'm proposing this or am a fan of this, but just to play devil's advocate, Superboy's in his name, right? So I think you have to have some kind of a redeemable quality if you're going to name the character Superboy. So I think that's an important aspect of having some kind of a redemption arc.
Okay, then don't have him murder over 30,000 people.
Agree. Right.
It's that simple. Like, there's certain lines that you just can't, like, I'm sorry, there's just certain lines that you can't cross and then expect to be able to come back. Like, I mean, there's literally that part in the first issue of Legion of Three Worlds where he goes on attack Takron Galtos and they say he's killed over 30,000 guards. And you're like, okay, done. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you can ask forgiveness as much as you want, but you're a mass murderer. Like, that's like, you've gone too far. And maybe I'm just not forgiving. Maybe that's my line in the sand. Like,
that's
I'm
right.
Like, it's just
mass murder. Yeah. Come on, man.
Yeah. Like, it's just, So, but having said that, like, I mean, there is like really easy, simple ways that they could do this. Like, I mean, if they're already going to play with timelines and break anything, like, why not just have somebody go back to his timeline and change his past? So it's like, okay, he's Superboy Prime on a different, the other one I think they have to do is, I think they have to depower him. Like, I think it's just too much, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, why does he need the Legion if he can literally destroy everything?
Right.
Like, whoa, what's the point? So,
yeah. No,
I'm surprised you went with Superboy Prime. I thought you were going to go, when you're talking about sucking the air out of the room, with John Kent and the Bendis boot, because that's the last Superboy.
I'm sorry. You're breaking up. You're breaking up.
That's the last Superboy to talk about.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that. Honestly, I don't think, well, in the context of that Legion run, yes, I do agree. And I'm not as much of a connoisseur of John Kent, because I was the only John Kent I really read was in that, in that Legion run. But I know a lot of people have a lot of good feelings towards the characters, especially when he was younger and he was palling around with Damian, because everybody talks very highly about the Super Sons runs that were going on, but then he was aged up into I don't know even know how old. I guess he's a late teenager. And then he's a significant part of the Bendis version of the Legion for sure.
Yeah, I will give. I mean, I know the amount of praise for Bendis on the Legion on this podcast is infinitesimally small, but I will give this, like, using John Kent as our entry point into the Legion with a whole new reboot and having him learn what's going on. That was done better than I expected it to go. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a really good idea. Like, it's just this great, here's your entry point to the Legion. And I like that. And I thought a lot of the stuff that they did worked really well. I mean, seeing him date Saturn Girl, I wasn't as much of a fan of that. But you know what? If you're going to break stuff, just break it, but make it so that we buy it, right? That it kind of works. But I mean, look, it could have been like what they did to Ultra Boy annoyed me far more than what they did to Superboy. So I'll just go with of all the things they could have done, that was.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I guess that was why I didn't really think about John in that context. Was you're right. He was basically the cipher for the reader during that particular run, and it worked. That piece of it did actually work. It was, like you said, it was everything else that was kind of problematic.
Yeah, but
the less said about that, the better.
Yes. Well, that's the future episode that we keep putting off and putting off and putting off. And we're like, eventually the day is going to come when we're like, all right, let's talk about
sometime in the year 2345. I don't know.
So, all right. So let's look forward a little bit. We've kind of gone back to all the different things. And I think we both kind of agree that Superboy should have some place in the Legion. Like, we're good with that. So if we say
absolutely.
like any Legion moving forward, like as something gets relaunched,
Yeah.
we want to see a Superboy in there. Do you have a preference of what you want to see moving forward, or what you'd like to see them do with the new relaunch?
I would, if they're going to have any kind of these stories, they need to be flashback stories, because I mean, I'm not, again, we talked about Prime. I'm not really a big fan of him being a Legion member moving forward. We'll see. I don't know what Joshua's plans are, but I know he's he is a fan of the character. So we'll have to see where that goes. But I'm not I would rather not Prime be a Legion member moving forward. I would rather see flashbacks of this Clark having Legion stories that we haven't seen before.
Yep, that works for me. I think it depends on what version of the Legion. Like, are they going to be 15 years old, or are they going to be in their 20s? Like, is it going to be the Legion that we're seeing in the Dark Side's Legion, like the established heroes, or in the case of the story, the established villains? Like, if they're in their, let's just say that they're all in their early 20s. That's what we're going with for the Legion. Then I don't know how you put a Superboy in there. And I think you've got to do flashbacks, right?
Or you use John Kent again, right? But in this time you use him in a way that makes more sense, right? In a way that you're having him with this, again, we don't know what the Legion is going to look like, but it's going to be some kind of an established team, and he's there for training purposes, really, at the end of the day. Yeah. I think that would be, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that I don't want to see, because we talked about this way early on in this episode, is if they do like the 15-year-old teenagers and they're pulling Clark into these stories. And then to me, it's just, we're just going to have the same problem we had 40 years ago, where he's going to be wearing massive amounts of plot armor because we know nothing can happen to him. And I don't want to see that. If they're going to do a teenage Legion, and they're like, I would almost rather they say, and as much as this would break everything, I would almost rather they say, hey, we're going back to meet Clark every so often, but hey, Clark, we're going to get your son to come join us so we can teach him how to be a superhero. But then I don't know how you don't do that without breaking every timeline. We'll have to see. I mean,
and I guess that's the other piece of it, right? It should be, I don't know if having him be a regular member, like a permanent regular member of the team on the page would work either. I think it's guest star appearances only, I think, is the way to go.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, right, like there is a financial aspect to this too, right? Sure. Like, we need to have, I mean, it's got to be tied to the Superman comics. So I would almost guarantee, I would almost bet money right now, there is going to be an Action Comics Legion of Superheroes crossover, so they can pull all the readers from Action Comics where Wade is telling stories about Clark as a young hero. Yep. Yep. And they pull him into, like, if that doesn't happen, I don't know what DC is doing.
I agree.
So there's going to be that aspect. So I really like your idea of like the flashbacks, but I think, I think moving forward, maybe they just say like, we're a bunch of 20-year-olds. We're going to bring John Kent in. We're going to teach him some stuff. He's going to be in that role of like the kid. So like, I mean, like just to give sort of an example of a perfect story would be, hey, John, this is Karate Kid. He's going to teach you 17 different fighting styles that you've never heard of before.
Exactly.
And he's going to kick the crap out of you, even though he doesn't have any superpowers. Let's go. To me, that's where you kind of play with this.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see.
We'll see. I mean, at the end of the day, Legion's going to be, a story or a team with 30 characters. What's one more on one hand, but on the other hand, that one more is Superboy. So, and he will tend to get a lot of attention. So we'll have to see.
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, in a dream world, right? We're going to have 2 Legion books. So one will be in the past with Superman, and one will be in the future, and then we'll get both, and then I will be happy. And and the amount of money I'm spending every month will go up.
Yeah.
There was one thing that we forgot to mention, and I can't believe we forgot it, but we just get talking about this stuff. Superboy's Legion, that Elseworld story by Mark Farmer, Alan Davis, which just crystallizes how important Superboy is to the Legion. Like it was this perfect tale. I'm only going to say this. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this story, but like, if you haven't read this and you want to kind of understand the Legion, especially Silver Age, Bronze Age Legion, really quickly, this is a 2-part story. The artwork by Alan Davis is beautiful.
As always. Yeah.
Like, one thing that comic artists seem to really struggle with is drawing teenagers. And Davis does it about as well as you could. I mean, it's Alan Davis. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything he doesn't draw well, but like he knocks this one out of the park. And I remember the first time I read it and I was like, man, I wish Mark Farmer had written more Legion comics. Like he obviously gets it.
Yeah.
He understands this perfectly. It's a great series. It's 2 issues and it tells you why Superboy matters.
Yep. And it's an Elseworld. So just so everybody knows, it's an Elseworld story where Superboy basically lands in the future of the 31st century and builds a team around him is the basic plot of the story. That becomes the Legion. But it's a little bit of a different Legion than what we're used to. But again, to your point, Jay, it's a great story. It's a great read. It's a quick read. It's not like anything you're going to be spending an inordinate amount of time going through. But it's fun. It's a really fun story.
Yeah. And if you love Silver Age Legion, the number of references and Easter eggs and just little bits they've put in, you say it's a quick story. Like you can spend so much time just staring at these little points they put in.
Well, I mean, the art, Alan Davis's art is just always fantastic. So you definitely collect it just for that.
Exactly. Wanted to make sure I called that out before we wrapped everything up. Okay. Anything else we want to say about Superboy? Anything that we missed?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of stuff. Of course, if folks want to let us know anything that we might have missed, because there's a lot of history for this character, please feel free to reach out and let us know.
Yeah. And and we love seeing your comments. Either send us emails, and I always get the email address wrong, but I'll try to get it right. Send us emails at longlivethelegion2025@gmail.com. We love to hear your comments. I will give like a little personal request moving forward. If there's questions that you have, like if you're sitting there and I mean, I know a lot of our listeners are probably longtime Legion fans who probably spend most of the time going, well, that's wrong. And that's wrong. And because I do that when I'm listening to a lot of podcasts. But if you're a new Legion reader and you're listening to this and you're like, hey, what does this mean? Or can you explain this? Please fire those questions and we'd love to address those as well. So anything we can do to make your life easier as either a longtime Legion fan or a new Legion fan, please let us know. Again, longlivethelegion2025@gmail.com. There's nothing else for us to talk about, right? We don't have any, we have no emails. We have no Blue Sky comments.
Nope. I mean, the Blue Sky comments are there, but everybody can read the Blue Sky comments.
There we go. So I'm going to ask this. Do you have any recommendations for anybody? Yes, comic book wise. Yes. Well, actually, any recommendations?
Well, like if there's a movie, I guess so. We'll stick with comic books right now. But this is gonna sound kind of cheesy, but I'm really having fun reading this book, and I'm gonna recommend the Sophie Campbell Supergirl series that's out right now. It's very much cheeseball. It's not very it's certainly not the Supergirl that we're going to be getting in the movies next year that we got a preview of this last summer, but it's a cute, fun story, and I think it's something that's safe for kids to read and have fun with, and because that features the super pets, and she's rapidly kind of surrounding herself with her own little rogues gallery and a lot of side characters that are kind of cool. So she's building a little universe around her that's really fun to see evolve. So I'm going to recommend that.
Nice. I'm going to go more in the past for something. It's a book called Kabuki. Have you ever tried this one before?
I have not.
Okay. So David Mack, who is, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say one of the greatest artists to ever work in comics. His stuff is just stunningly beautiful. So have you ever read like the Echo series that ran in Daredevil? I'm trying to think what else that he's done artwork for like Marvel movies. He started off doing this Kabuki series, and it started off black and white, and then his painting came in, and by the time he wrapped up, it's a collection of different miniseries. By the time he finished the whole thing, it's literally a book where every page is a piece of art, and they've collected everything into this huge omnibus, so you can get the whole series in one big book. I cannot recommend this enough. The story is great, and a lot of times like you get great art and the story is great, and the art is so good. It's one of those series that you literally just stop and stare at a page for like 5 minutes and you go, I can't believe human beings are capable of this kind of artistic talent. And I can't recommend it enough. Kabuki, if you've never given it a shot, I would highly recommend this.
Yeah, I just pulled it up on the screen here just to get a look, and it looks fantastic.
I really love how a lot of the publishers now are basically saying like, we're going to give this art, or we're going to reprint things. We're going to give it the best treatment. We're going to put it in the best paper, because like they just, I don't know if you listen to, I'm going to call it another series on certain POV, and we talk about it all the time. Men of Steel interviewed J.M. DiMattia.
Yes.
And his Moonshadow series has been reprinted multiple times. And the newest one has just come out. I think it's Dark Horse that's reprinted it. And on Best Paper, blah, blah. It is a beautiful series. I'm recommending 2 things now.
Yes.
I love that they're doing this. I want more of these. Like, give me this artwork that is just so stunning and give it to me in a quality format so I can really appreciate this. Like, forget about a coffee table book, but like, this is what I want on my coffee table. Like, look at this. This is not that we have coffee tables anymore, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyways, let's go Kabuki. And if not that, Moonshadow. And we'll go with those.
Excellent.
There's my two recommendations. As
right.
I think it's time to shut off the mission monitor board. Where can everybody find you on the interwebs, Jim?
So I have my Legion Reviews website at jimboslegion.blogspot.com, where I try to post reviews on Legion-related comics as often as I can. You can find me personally on Blue Sky at jimbofett.bsky.social, on Reddit at jimbofett87, and on Discord as jimbofett, all of which have 2 T's, on the Legion Fan Club Discord, as well as the Certain Point of View Discord. How about you, Jay?
There we go. So I also have a weekly column. Well, I have a weekly column at jmlonglivethelegion.blogspot.com, where every week I look at normally 2 Legion-related issues. And then if you want to find me on Blue Sky, I'm at jmckiernan.bsky.social. If you want to find me on Discord or on Reddit, I go by the name Drake Burrows, which, as I say every episode, is because of my favorite Legionnaire. So please reach out and talk to us in there. And again, you can see me at the Certain POV Discord server and the Legion Discord server. Although I do not post as much as I should, I tend to be kind of the quiet person who jumps in every once in a while. But it's a great conversation on there if you're a Legion fan. So I would highly recommend it. And if you want to join, let's go back to the Long Live the Legion 2025 at gmail.com and just ask, and Jim will get you set up.
Yep. And so if you want to follow the podcast or get access to the Legion Discord, we are at Long Live the Legion 2025 at gmail.com, just like Jay said. Or you could also follow us on longlivethelegion.bsky.social, and you can comment on our episodes and things like that. We're getting a lot of good conversations going on over there. And also we are trying to expand, and we have a YouTube presence, and we have a budding Instagram and Facebook presence. And so we're working on that to get that up and running. But otherwise, go ahead and give us a 5-star rating on your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out and helps us deliver more great content to you guys. So looking forward to talking to you soon. And until next time, long live the Legion.
Long live the Legion.
All right, Josue, let's go through our new Comic Day stack. We have a lot to review.
I know. Maybe we've gone too far.
Well, let's see. Marvel, of course. DC.
I got Image, Dark Horse,
Black Mask, Boom, IDW.
Aftershock, Vault, of course, Mad Cave,
Oni, Valiant, Scout.
Magma, Behemoth.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, all we need now is a name for our show. We need a name for a show about reviewing comic books every week. Something clever, but not too clever.
Like a pun? It's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, something that seems funny at first, but we might regret later on as an impulsive decision a few dozen episodes in.
Yeah, we'll think of something.
Join Keith and Josue for We Have Issues, a weekly show reviewing almost every new comic released each week. Available on Geek Elite Media and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.